Well, welcome everybody. Nice to see such a big turnout. Although I'm not really surprised given that this is something that everybody seems to be talking about right now. And luckily we figured it all out. So you need look no further. No, we're very happy to have this as a what we're hoping will just be really a kind of pretty open conversation, sharing some policies in progress, and just talking together about how this very hot topic in the world at large is impacting museum publishers in particular. And because sometimes the resources that are available might not necessarily meet our needs, and having these sorts of conversations might help us all. So I'm Katie Reilly. I'm the Associate VP of Publishing, at the Art Institute of Chicago, and part of the MuPuDIG Planning Committee. And I will also be wearing a hat as a semi-presenter today, talking about some of the work we're doing at the Art Institute, but joined with a few other folks on the call. I'm going to start sharing my screen so that you can see what we will be talking about today. As a reminder, today this is being recorded. Sorry. I'm like a real crack at sharing because everybody see my slides now properly. So today we are going to be going over briefly some of the survey results. Some of you might have seen that we sent out a survey in advance of planning this to give us some guidance on what people are most interested in hearing about. And there were some cool findings from that. Talk about some of the topics, questions that people sort of raised in the survey or that we've heard. And then we'll invite some people who have kindly agreed to share some more about the work of their institutions, starting with Rob Stein. So first up, for the survey results, we wanted to understand just sort of where we were as a field. We sent this out to the NNPS listserv and to our MuPuDIG list, and to try to see sort of where people are on their journey of addressing these problems. A lot of people, I was interested, 40% have a staff policy already in place for AI use, 37% working on it, only 22% no, which made me feel kind of bad because we still didn't have a staff policy. And I was like, I'm behind. And then looking at author agreements, maybe a little bit less. That people are actively working on thinking about it. About 26% already have something in place, 30% without. We also just wanted to understand people's own personal comfort level with using it. So we got about over half of people just saying that they have not used any of these for professional tasks. Some have tried it out or done it a couple of times, but not something that, at least in this small group of people, was being readily adopted. And the things that they are using it for, leading the pack, is alt text or image descriptions is something that people have used, with a couple for translation for research projects. But most people just kind of said, I haven't or won't use it. So there was interesting sort of in the written comments positions on both sides of that. So when asking people why they are not using it, the highest concerns are about quality and scholarship, followed by intellectual property concerns, and then a lot of people, this was, people could click everything that they were worried about, but environmental concerns, labor concerns, or just a lack of their own kind of literacy to know how one might use it. And what people are most interested in learning about, the highest responses for that were about guidelines. So that's why we decided to focus this conversation on that topic. But there's a lot of other stuff that we can continue to dig into, especially doing a deeper dive into copyright concerns related to this. And some kind of case studies on how peers are potentially using it that could be interesting for us to talk about. And so some of the questions that guided our kind of planning this presentation today were about some questions again that, we've heard by talking with colleagues that we got from the survey, um, that, some of it is, how if there's a practical aspect of this and there's a sort of theoretical aspect to it. And where your institution wants to go sort of on that continuum as you're thinking about policy, how much is it just dealing with the nuts and bolts, the contractual issues, these other things that are maybe legal risk, versus, some of these other things that are maybe more values that we stand for, and where does a policy sort of emerge among those things? And just, the reality of how ingrained many of these tools are today. So, these are just some of the questions that we were asking ourselves that maybe we can touch upon together. Who's helping to participate in creating buy-in? Are we just accepting that this is reality and trying to sort of manage around it, or do we want to take a stance on its usage in a more overt way? Particularly as relates to us kind of in our responsibility being stewards of creativity, knowledge, and community. How can we develop AI literacy, if especially a lot of people within our community who are not really using it or maybe fully understanding it, and just legal risks and things that we need to be worried about. So today, we're happy to have some people joining us who are going to share a little bit about what their institutions have developed and how. And I know that many people on the call also were generous in sharing some feedback through the survey or other conversations, or have shared resources. And we hope that we'll have lots of time for just a more open conversation for others to share their own experiences and talk about some of these questions. So we'll start off with Rob Stein from the National Gallery of Art, who's going to do the kind of only formal presentation of today and talk about their process and their sort of very robust policy and training training protocols that they've set up. And then Katherine Boller from Yale University Press will share some about the development of their author guidelines and instructions for editors. Alle Austin from the Amon Carter Museum will talk about their very, very kind of lovely and succinct policy. I like the structure of their policy that they came up with. And I'll chime in with what we're doing here at the Art Institute, and where we are in that. So with that, I will pass it over to Rob. I will stop sharing so that he can.
Hi, everybody. First of all, let me just say hello. I'm Rob Stein. I'm the Chief Information Officer at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. I apologize if my network connection goes in and out on you a little bit today. So I will just keep rolling. It seems like it will catch up to me, but apologies in advance. Let me go ahead and share my screen. And can I get a thumbs up if you see a full screen title slide? Great, thank you. So today I thought I would come and speak to you a little bit about our journey for both AI literacy and policy setting at the National Gallery of Art. And really our journey in thinking about our policy work began back in 2023 when we hosted a convening of about 35 representatives from across many different museums. We issued our first AI acceptable use policy in June of 2024, and it is very typical of policies. It's legal heavy, jargony, as it should be. It does, at that time, place a lot of authority in me and my team to decide on acceptable uses from a technology perspective. Within the federal government, OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, provides some other guidance, and it benefits us to align with those guidances. We're going to talk in another slide or two about one of the definitions that we created, which is a little arbitrary, but we define the difference between what is an acceptable enterprise AI tool and what would be considered a commercial AI. And then in our early rollouts, we determined that we wanted to understand how people were using AI within the policy. So we established a use case registry where people would tell us what idea they had for AI, and then we approved all of them, but we kept them in a ledger where we could turn back to them. One really important caveat in the policy is that it says that no unsupervised use is allowed unless approved in writing by the CIO. So I'll tell you a little bit more about how we moderate that, but that's going to be a key thing. And another elective for us is that we decided as an art institution that we would not permit AI to be used in the creation of images that purport to be a work of art. We didn't want to inject uncertainty for the public in which artworks were quote unquote real versus AI generated. I feel very strongly that policy work and literacy work have to go together because if people don't understand enough about the technology, they also won't understand how to apply the policy at the same time. So we did an awful lot of outreach to staff around the museum just to introduce them to the very idea of what is AI and why is it different. We distilled that 10-page policy and legal language down to just a few key communication strategies. We built sort of a handbook or a quick reference guide that put that policy language into something that anyone on the staff could understand. We published a variety of resources about artificial intelligence on the intranet. Can I just do a check? Is everybody hearing me okay? I'm seeing you glitch, but the audio quality is all right? Okay, good enough. I hosted in-person trainings, but we also gave our help desk technicians specific training for how to support people. That tended to be where people normally came for technology help. So we wanted to make sure that they were up to speed on the policy and prepared to answer questions. We integrated topics about GenAI into our IT security training, which all staff are required to complete every year. You probably do something similar around email and phishing scams. And so we integrated GenAI knowledge into there. And then we established a community of practice, which was really a peer sharing organization where people would share their own tips, tricks, and best practices. So that group has grown to about 150 people right now, and that has been really helpful. Recently, we launched a formal multi-part AI training that we developed at the National Gallery on my team. We call it Next Now. And so we're thinking together about what the future digital workplace might look like and how could we co-design that. So the first part of Next Now was simply AI training from how do you log in and what's a prompt all the way through more advanced uses. So we just completed that and we'll be launching more campaigns and engagements in the coming months. So I mentioned this distinction between commercial AI versus enterprise AI, and we've found that this was very helpful in that we said that we define public information as information that any member of the public might find easily on the internet. So if my parents could find it, then public information can be used with any commercial AI tool. So a commercial AI tool is one that pops up on the internet and you get that free license and you want to play with it and figure out what it is. So we're actively encouraging people that this is an acceptable use, but it's only acceptable with public information. So we want to encourage that exploration and play and experimentation using safe content. So the important thing is that all other data, if you can't find it easily on the internet, then we consider that non-public data. And if you need to do something with non-public data, then we require you to use one of the tools that we provide to you. So at the National Gallery, we currently provide every staff member access to, full access to Microsoft Copilot and OpenAI's ChatGPT. So people have choice of many tools to use for experimenting, and the idea is to make experimenting in the right tools easier than doing the wrong thing with the wrong tools. We say that custom AI tools may only be built under the supervision of the technology team. So we do build out custom tools from APIs that are available on the web. And we can do that for organizations inside of the National Gallery, but we require them to coordinate that with us and not to contract it out to an independent third party. And we're seeing a lot of third-party AI tools that are proliferating in almost every software that we license. And so we've worked with our procurement team that they watch out for any software procurement, and we have an addendum to our standard contracts about third-party AI use. And it requires a vendor to provide us information, which my office then reviews to determine if they are using AI responsibly. And we're pretty amenable to that, but we have found that some organizations that are integrating AI into their systems aren't really behaving in a way that we are comfortable with. I mentioned the quick reference guide, and I thought I'd just step you through it. The meat of the quick reference guide are a set of do's and don'ts for generative AI and acceptable use. So we wanted to make it super clear, do these things, don't do these other things. So we say do review all output from genAI tools prior to using it. And this is along with that corollary of no unsupervised use is allowed. We say that we should disclose when a genAI tool was used to create text or content for the public. And for a policy, this is the right way to state it. In practice, it's a little more nuanced than that. And so we think of it like when you're collaborating with an editor. If you are the author of the primary text and the editor helps you improve it and fix your grammar and your brand voice, then you probably are just cited as the author. But if you're co-authoring together, then you're going to cite both. And so we would recommend the same logic applies to genAI. If it's just checking your spelling and telling you where you could clarify a point, we would just cite you as an author. If genAI initiates all the content and you're the editor, well, you should definitely cite that AI created it. This shouldn't have to be said, but if you're using genAI, it doesn't get you around following the rest of the procedures and approval processes that are already in place for how you do your job. So follow all existing process and approval workflows that you would normally do if genAI never existed. If you feel like you have a good use case where you want to use private data, then just tell us about it and we're likely to approve it for you. And we're going to give you the tool to do it in, and we'll probably help you figure out how that gets done. We did want staff to notify their division head that they were going to do this so that we keep the manager in the loop. The manager is aware of how staff are using AI. So we also ask them to get permission from their division head if they want to contract with a third-party vendor who's going to use AI tools. So let's say this is your fundraising and development list. If your third-party vendor wants to use genAI on personal information from your donors, we want to know that. It's probably not something we would say yes to, and your division head certainly should know that. And then we request that vendors disclose when they are using genAI. So for publishing specifically, as you contract with authors, it might be a good idea that you require the authors to disclose how they plan to use genAI, and then review that with your own level of comfort as to how that would be used. And it's probably best not to make blanket statements of we approve or we don't approve. But if authors are disclosing to you what they're planning to do and how they're doing it, then you can make an informed decision as to whether or not that fits your particular publication. In terms of the do nots, we say do not use any commercial GenAI tools with National Gallery data not available to the general public. So if you can't find it on the internet, don't stick it into that free AI tool from Alibaba. Don't enter any of your personal information or any non-public data into commercial GenAI. I think in setting policies, it's really useful to think of staff's private use as well, and to coach them on responsible use of technologies in their private lives. We say not to use your National Gallery email address as a part of any commercial GenAI. So I'm sure all of your institutions get this too, but I'm always marketed to say XYZ vendor tells me 3,500 staff members with email address nga.gov already use our platform. So don't bother. Don't do that. We coach folks not to use any content from GenAI that you suspect may include copyrighted material. This is becoming less and less of an issue than it was in 2024 when we started using this. Image generation would freely create Disney characters and images and really, really, really copyrighted. And the New York Times and OpenAI lawsuit is about reproducing in whole fact articles. We are all fairly informed as to what the content in our field is. If you see something that looks just too familiar or it rings an awful bell, then you can screen it by copying and pasting it into a different AI tool and asking if this matches any published content. These are guidance from Office of Management and Budget for all federal institutions, which I think is very reasonable. Don't use GenAI if the safety of people or property is at risk. So I will never use GenAI to control the door locks or the fire alarms, for instance. That would be a really obvious case. And don't use GenAI if you think it might impact people's rights because of implicit bias. This one's trickier and it requires more sensitive thought, but it's also why we want our staff to review the use cases. The typical one that pops up for us here is in hiring. It would be very easy to let GenAI comb through the 1,000 resumes you received for that entry-level position and tell you the top 10 people you should interview. I would suggest that's a bad idea. AI is trained on a biased data set, so it will use that bias to determine those top 10. So that would be rights impacting, in my opinion. And then don't try to get around security protocols that we put in place. AI is getting really good at writing software and telling you workarounds. And we have scanning and ways to know when that happens. So please don't do that. Those are sort of the do's and don'ts. And there's a lot behind these, so we'll save that for kind of a question and answer time. But we did have a follow-up conversation with our executive team in which we're still really wrestling through this. What are the cases when we should consider using unsupervised AI, and what could we do to mitigate the risks? So a really practical one is last week we launched visual descriptions for our entire online collection of artworks on the National Gallery website. We have not human reviewed all 120,000 of those yet. We are working mitigate this. So one of the types of input users can direct immediately to an AI. We found the content that AI created and that it could be potentially biased or unreliable for our visual descriptions. We may use AI generated content behind the scenes, but not reveal it to the user. So we might do subject tagging on our collection and use those subject tags to help surface search. But because we're unsure of the authority, we may elect not to display them on the page. Help you find things better, but it won't be displayed as authority. So we discussed with our executive team what their risk tolerance meter is. And this is going to be different for every institution, but it's a really helpful discussion to have in general. So the way that we did this is I said there from the, I'm sorry, I'm wrestling with my overview screen. From the bottom of the spectrum, hey, don't use unsupervised AI at all. That's where our AI policy was. They only use unsupervised AI for internal purposes. Use it, but use it behind the scenes. Go ahead and use unsupervised AI, but add caps and contexts, or stop so much and get to the scale and get going. So that's the range of. I note that our initial policy was on the most conservative of that, and then I set out for executive team that my gut feel is we should land somewhere in here. And since that time, we've launched two AI uses that lend kind of unsupervised AI, but is a bit of a collection slot machine where it generates AI terms from a predetermined list and returns images from the collection that would match those three randomly generated terms. We talk visual descriptions. So this was a very diagnostic tool or dialogic tool that let people express a wide variety of it clear that not every use case needs to adopt nuance was really helpful to us. But thank you. I hope that was useful to you, and turn it over to the other presenters, and then we can come back and talk some more later. Thanks, Katie.
So much. Super helpful. Lots of prompts for further conversation. So I will pass it over to Katherine to just say, talk for a few minutes about the policy at Yale and some of the specifics of the situation there that they were trying to address.
Yes, thank you. And that was so helpful. And actually, presentation, I realized that much of what we've decided to do kind of echoes the steps that you've taken at the National Gallery. I think you have in a much more detailed way than I think we have. Um, so at we're a department of Yale University. And I think most of our conversations around AI really started in September 2024 when the university made a number of AI tools available to the community, including walled garden tools, and we're encouraging staff and students to use those. That spearheaded some action and some different I think um, the first I think a little bit of a wake-up call that our authors were probably starting to use AI, and it's something that we needed to up front. So we did author guidelines, and we included this about AI in our author guidelines, asking authors to disclose to us any use of AI when submitting their evaluate it further. More recently, we have kind of responded to acknowledge that we also using AI tools in turn forward, not necessarily knowing what the so that there's a bit of reciprocity here. As transparent as possible to our authors that may be part of our process as well. So I think that our guidelines, the language we've shared with the group so that people can see that. The other thing was that I think many of us really weren't users of AI, and these tools were a little bit of some of our colleagues had more experience than others. So we started a fairly informal AI work group, and we started to meet quarterly to kind of talk through issues around AI, to kind of encourage people to do some experimenting with the Yale walled garden tools to understand what kind of applications we could actually potentially benefit from. And that eventually, a few meetings into it, led us to working on internal guidelines so that we had a shared understanding of what was appropriate tools, and those very much kind of to line with the kind of things that Rob talked about, the National Gallery. For the most part, anything that would be kind of proprietary information would be used only within the approved Yale walled garden tools, ensure that LLMs are not training on the content that we provide there. Obviously, that we're not making copyrighted content publicly available. Thankfully, the university does have resources that we have been able to, in some cases, vet other software or explore kind of bespoke AI applications, and get that kind of security review. So, for example, we have experimented with an AI software for writing alt text. The university was able to review that for us and kind of saw the use of the software. And but as part we do have the expectation that any of AI tools that are not part of kind of Yale's standard toolkit are vetted both for security and at IOP. So that's all I have, unless there are any questions.
Thanks so much, Katherine. Let's we can keep going through this and then see what comes at the end after everybody's said the piece. So Allie?
Hello, can everyone hear? Hi, I'm Allie. I'm the associate and I co-chair our AI working group with who has been one of the kind of leaders of our AI policy since the beginning. A working group that was established right at the start, didn't become co-chair until about a year in staffing changes. So the way our kind of was through one of our colleagues went to a conference that discussion on proprietary information becoming through use. So our policy was kind of more staffed in them recognizing that we should probably have policy and pitching that to leadership. So in three, we formed a working group to discuss AI use at the museum. That as opposed to creating a policy, we really wanted to do more of a guideline stuff. Because while we did have representation at the museum, none of us were in leadership at the material level. We didn't really feel like it was our place to set a strict policy, more kind of general guidelines of voice law was going to be important for the interests. And we also identified pretty quickly that we would include a literacy document to give people a better understanding of the different types of AI and how it can be used. So for the most part, I think our guidelines address similar things in terms of, purpose and proper use, put into AI and what can't be, citation of information and all of that stuff. And like I said, because we're just a working group of different people that might use AI, don't really have tools as an institution. Just, general guidelines of what we have. And the literacy document, which we put together from a lot of different resources that the working group read through and identified a couple that we thought were really good for kind of generalized topic on general AI information, bias, environmental impacts, and things like that, that we're hoping to update regularly as kind of systems change and things like that. It's a very quick rundown. Hopefully it's helpful.
That's great. I'll speak a little bit to the Art Institute's work in this regard, which I don't have any links in this resource library document in the chat, and you'll find there links to the Amon Carter's guidelines, Yale guidelines, a number of other ones that Rob's that we have found, as well as just some of this readings and for who policies that they are willing to share or anything they have found helpful to consult, like please share it, add it to this resource document. But soon our policy at the Art Institute will add it here as well. There's a lot of what people have said that's relating the Art Institute situation. I think the very pithily named working group responsible use of generative AI in public facing content. So we were trying to make very we understood that our IT was working on a lot of the stuff that Rob talked about. We're kind of behind the National Gallery in terms of actually implemented the enterprise tools. There will be some that are available. They were sort of working on the general policy around privacy protections and those technical things. My boss, who's the head of curatorial, asked me if I would kind of lead up a group that was like the particular needs within the museum, and knowing that like the idea of you have the sandbox, this is the appropriate sandbox to play in, but like should you be playing in it, like get more of the recommendations. And I would say so, Allie, like where we have ended up, where there is like a piece that is probably going to go into like the employee handbook, like this, a lot of the stuff that Rob was talking about, and then this is probably going more kind of like our author guidelines or lines or style guide. That's like the effect will probably continue to change. And we have a cross-departmental group from publishing, digital, direct office, the library and archives, conservation, development, and marketing and communications, basically all people creating written content that could be an introduction that could be consumed. And one of the things that we have really tried to do, and I'd be so interested to learn more about approved use cases document, is trying to like really think, everybody in that group break out into their areas to like really think we've kind of had all of these conversations about what we believe is the right thing to do for this, but like when the rubber hits the road, if you're writing a blog post, if you're doing whatever, like to think of specific use cases has been very helpful. And I think the other thing that's been very helpful and I think that Rob kind of might have alluded to this, that having we're trying to kind of create work for ourselves of what we think is appropriate, like what we should be allowed at all, what we think should be, but be like disclosed, especially if we're thinking that, and things that people could do and we don't know. And so right now, and making a decision to be disclosed to if you're an author needs to just somebody needs to disclose using this tool to create these slides or whatever, it's declared and share, trying to tease those things out, and both in like what is possible to do versus it's it's a copyright page of a book or a footnote, but it's harder to like have a declaration on a website, so I think like thinking through has been really helpful. So I'll stop there, and we'll look forward to sharing more about that. We have our author contracts to mention, add in some parenthetical mention of AI. They don't have any of the information in the contracts about what is permitted or not. It just says that it needs to be declared subject to our review and approval, and we're putting the guide about acceptable or unacceptable in our submission guidelines, so we make that easier for us to continue to respond to how to evolve for issues that are arising. So I will stop there, and we can open it up in our 13 minutes for broader conversation. If you have a question, throw it in the chat, raise your hand, any specific questions for the group, or want to just share anything. I'm sure many of you are doing this work right now, and if you have other perspectives or questions, please one question right now. Do we as a field have an ethical responsibility? Which tools choose to adopt vis-a-vis go too fast for me, vis-a-vis the company's corporate values, ChatGPT versus Claude, etc. Rob, I'm wondering if you, as the kind of having the purview over legacy systems, if that was, how much were legacy systems or just sort of like, this is what we're working in, what platforms?
I think I'm back now, Katie, but I missed your.
There's a question about which tool to choose to adopt vis-a-vis kind of the. I'm curious if how much of it you just were building, you were kind of dealing. Here's our existing
Right.
technical records that we're doing this versus actively one or the other.
Right. And Erica, thanks for that question. I would say yes, there is an ethical responsibility on us for making those decisions, but I'd encourage not to about AI, but really about who we choose our partners. So if you have a son not taking money from alcohol, do you want to add genAI to that list, or I think it's true that museums don't really. We think a lot, talk about a lot, but we don't have a lot of action and practice. So I do think it's important. I think there are all issues around AI and AI that will evolve very quickly, and I don't know systems that have an agile response to making those kinds of decisions. But I do think we have a responsibility to at least consider it.
Thanks, Rob. There is a question here from Jenny about AI language translation. We had this exact problem at the Art Institute, that were supposedly written by humans, and the people were reviewing them and they were like, the adjective noun order is wrong, and they ran it through GPT or whatever, and the translation came out exactly so beyond, clearly paying for a service that we did not get. It is definitely an issue, and the fact, could be signing something too that's saying that they're not using this material, one of the provisions that we did add that to our author agreement. We have there that, there's the usual stuff that says we may buy you material and you are only to use it for this and third parties. And obviously if somebody's taking putting it to they're sharing it with we are going to work on that we have with translators to make that clear. But I don't know if other people have or ways. I mean, I guess it's you have to try to find trusted people, but it's hard. Where institution are you at, Jenny?
I'm in Canada at the Canadian War Museum, so we are compelled to do everything. So we did just add a clause. External contractors have to disclose AI use to me, just for reasons and to try to sensitize it. So it's both that and also with our internal staff who send material to my to be pushed out through different channels. And Al is the translator a lot of people use, and sort of security, ethics side, and then also internally that people see it as like a fast, you can save money and time, and in fact, it's generating more work for my team. So a lot of different pain points.
Let's see. That's a good question. So Jessica, do you want to uh, ask maybe your press of your of your questions?
So three different questions in the chat, and happy to respond to any of them. But I think the thing that's most pressing on my from lots of people that they're using AI to supply alt text that has not been successful at all. And so I'm people about what kinds of tools, and within those tools will you end up with something that's actually useful to them.
I think I mentioned the alt text tool that we used, and we did a little bit. The program that we alt text AI, and our sometimes it yields good results, and others it frankly doesn't. And right, it is a certain level of editorial that is required to for us. It has sped things up. So we, you know, then not at all. And that's where we are with it. I don't think that we are ready for oversight for it. That's to come.
Are you able to like custom your to it at all, or do you just upload the image and then comes out?
The latter for all.
Okay.
Jessica, we did work on this for our collections and developed a series of that work in a certain order. So I'm happy to share those prompts with anybody who would like them. Really categorize the images being described according to the object classification, but a little bit more than that. Our interpretation and learning team already written some guidelines for visual scripts that were to be used by human authors. Guidelines into a prompt for the AI that let the AI out its first revision of a visual description, differentiating a visual description from an alt text should be less than 75 words. Visual descriptions are often closer to paragraphs. So we decided to move to a visual description model. After I made the first attempt, we had a set of written visual descriptions, about 2,000 of them. We look for visual similar object type, and then we tell the AI writing to better mirror what the author. And that gets us into a range of results I think are quite good. We decided to go revised mode for releasing those after we find illusion communities and learn actually very sophisticated users of in their life in many areas, and they were navigating some of the new generated text meant. Commitment to do a human editorial view. We just decided put what we feel are really results first while we work through them all, waiting till we finish everything to put it up perfect. So that was our approach. But you could and let us know. There's also a feedback where anybody who spots something wrong and can fix it right away. So.
On time, we can kind of keep going through the questions. People can hang out for as long as they are able. So Kari had a good question about if you're asking authors to those usages. We theoretically have an answer to that. That's part of we, in addition to the working group that's with the broader people from across the museum, we kind of breakout meeting with just the here in publishing to, again, really kind of go through this and just it's and I think, at the end of the day, it would be thought that something was afoot. You bring it to me, bring it to the editorial director. We'll work it out as on a case basis. But we do have some general, around some of the stuff that kind of Rob was talking. Just like, don't have AI start the draft of your text. Like, to us, that's not what we're paying you as an author to do. But if you are using genAI to help you create the caption lists that from existing materials that you're submitting to us, helping with formatting, helping with, you needed some storming help for titles, section titles of things that we, would accept that could be a very positive for it. But that's part of why we will continue to change and kind of on that track. And to answer to your earlier, if the policies pertain to everybody in the museum, that is why we have really break it out into use cases as interpretive texts and content or presentations or scholarly content, and asked the people who really are those areas to go through that exercise with their teams of I actually feel like this would work on the ground, and try to do that in a little bit more of a structured way. So that's our approach.
Thanks, Katie. Has it come up, or how frequently has provided something meaty for you to discuss? Or
our authors have not disclosed AI to us yet, so we're waiting for it.
How it is on the ground.
Okay, Elizabeth had a question about discussion of environmental impact in creating policies. Does anybody want to talk about that, how that might have come up or not come up?
I'm happy to jump into that one. It comes up a lot, and it should. It's a very very quickly. So it is true that generative AI companies as a whole are using enormous amounts of electricity and for the training of those AI models. The use, or what they is a relatively lighter lift side, and different institutions will take a different role on this. But again, I think in a lot of cases, the usage that in particular are responsible for would foremost the temperature and humidity control in our galleries, exhibition loans on it, and social media and video streaming as just a pure is far more energy consuming than AI is right now. To be where AI is growing and is surging. So that may not be the case always, but I think it is always a good idea to energy consumption or environmental impact, uh, and understand more about how it's changing. So, I don't know. It's going to be an individual decision for each institution, but also to say that many companies working in this area have to decrease the amount of energy consumption because, frankly, running out of the ability to get it. And then I should mention there are a lot of engineering techniques that really economize for our art museum. It's that little slot machine sort of serendipity moment. That one looks and feels like it's used kind of press the button, but in fact, it pre-generated results once and then never again. So actually a very efficient way to something that feels like AI, similar to the visual descriptions. It we did 120,000 visual descriptions, about 2 hours and $800. But we have to do it once until we determine not what we need anymore. We want it to change, but it does not get reiterated every time. So figuring out AI, figuring out a way to use it where you're only doing the thing once or very limited number of generation actually is probably far more environmentally conscious than this Zoom call, for instance.
Allie, were you going to say something? I wasn't sure if you would.
Yeah, I was going to say that it was a big part of our conversation when we were building lines. It's something that we made sure that we had at least one resource, a literacy document, just because we knew it was going to come up as a top conversation. But I think it's a really good point, like look at it with the other existing usage at the museum and stuff. So it's been part of the conversation, and I want to make sure to address in our literacy document.
We kind of ended up in the same place. We talked about what we want to call that out, but and I don't know, maybe it was just we were like, it feels like the museum should have an overall energy and sustainability policy that addresses all of these things that you're talking about, Rob, that because this is just one piece. It kind of gets a little bit thing. It's like not to the environmental effects, but there's lots of stuff that we do. Air freighting books.
If we're going to make, we might as well direct our efforts to our activity would make the improvement. And if it turns out it's the most negative impact, then so be it.
Okay, and I think French the link to an example with an editor's note. That's really great. That was a model of a declaration. And then there was one other
on like disclosure of the particular like have authors if they do like editors. That's one thing that I'm not sure, but might be helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, we have when ours are ready, we do have a sample, just some very quick things about like what it's like a little paragraph. It's like I used this tool in this way, resulting in this was, and it was vetted in whatever way. Like it kind of like how was it used, just how it was handled, like how that like in terms of and then I think maybe the last one that we didn't, Jennifer encountered author AI use issues, non-publication text such as exhibition labels and etc. As a kerfuffle recently created image on a label at a museum and people being but I don't have any personal experience with that.
I mean, I can since it was at Denver. We did use an AI generated comp image on a label, and gallery hosts noticed it, and it became yeah, it got articles about it, and we ended up taking the image off the label, and the impetus for it was not being able to find the right comp image that the curator wanted for the label, that in the public domain. So it was one of the sparks to start the process of defining it at Denver. And we're not using AI images in any labels going forward.
Once bitten. Well, thank you. I'd be thankful. We will hold it here. It's been really great conversation. We appreciate everybody joining us. If there, like I said, we will post a link to this resource library on our website, the one that I've been. There's our email address is MuPuDIG. So if you have any other resources that you want to share, it's like, oh, this video, or I've used this policy, please that they get added. So special thanks to Rob, he had to cut out, and to Allie and Ken for sharing the work of their teams. Much appreciated, and have a great Tuesday.